Hello and welcome to another video podcast all about aging as positively as possible. Having said that, today's subject is grief, which lots of us probably feel there's not very much to be positive about. But it is very much part of the aging process. As we get older, I'm afraid we're going to have to deal with grief on a more regular basis. So I'm going to look at different forms of grief. I'm going to look at different stages of grief. And I'm also going to look at what has worked for me since my husband died almost 2 years ago and what wasn't very helpful. Now, we can be grief-stricken in many different ways and in response to many different things. And it could be losing a job or being made redundant. It could be certainly at the end of a love affair that you didn't want to end. Loss of a pet. I think particularly as one gets older, loss of the life that you did have before you became less mobile or before your husband became ill, that sort of thing. And of course, there is more death around as you get older. Obviously, we lose our parents, and then we may be unlucky enough to lose a spouse. And some people, of course, lose a child, which I think must be the most desperate thing of all. So there are stages of grief, and the first person I think who really identified these was a woman called Dr. Kubler-Ross, and she identified 5, and the acronym for those is DABDA, and that stands for denial, anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance. I think now many people would regard those as maybe slightly simplistic. And certainly I think if you're looking at that model, you can't ever go, oh yes, I've ticked that one off, I'll never feel that again, because that doesn't seem to be how it works. And sometimes you might feel that you've experienced all of those 5 in one day, and sometimes you think it doesn't really apply to you. But I think they're there as a useful guide. I also think one of the stages, but perhaps it's a thread that goes right through, is guilt. And people often say to me things like, oh, my wife had dementia and one day I was trying to get her in the car and she just wouldn't do it, and eventually I shouted at her and I really can't think of anything else now. I feel so guilty about that. Most of us, when we've looked after somebody who's become increasingly ill, have got that sort of moment tucked away in our memory, and it's a horrible memory and you do feel guilty. But I think the only way to counteract that, and time is a healer here, is you just have to focus on the other things. You have to think, that day I was absolutely at the end of my tether with tiredness. But actually I did do a lot of good things, and I was caring, and I did do my very best. And gradually I think you're able to see again the things that you did well, as opposed to dwell on the things that you did badly that you feel guilty about. So what helps? Well, talking is really the best help, I find. You do want to talk about how you feel. For some people this is hard, but I don't think there's any replacement for it really. However, some people like to have rituals. I mean, that if you've got any religion, you might very well always light a candle for your mum or something when you go into a church. I have a little ritual here on a Friday evening at 8, which happens to be the day and the time that my husband died, and I do light a candle in here and think about things, sometimes have a conversation which is a bit one-sided, but I find it comforting and it helps me. So I think a lot of us do find some comfort in a ritual of some kind. Some people plant something in memory of something, and even if you've just got a window box, that can be a very special thing because you feel it's associated with this person you've lost that you mind so much that you have lost. So when it comes to talking to people though about how you're feeling, you do have to pick and choose a little bit. I'm extremely lucky, so I've got a friend who lives very near me, who had a very good marriage, as I did, and who lost her husband about 3 years before I lost mine. And she's very good at sort of saying, well, you would feel that, and kind of normalising how I'm feeling. And I'm really so grateful that I've got her. By contrast, somebody that I didn't know very well sort of came out of the woodwork not long after I lost my husband and said, you must talk and I'm a very good listener. And I sort of reeled back because I thought of all the people I wanted to talk to, she wasn't anywhere near the top of the list. And it felt a bit presumptuous, actually, that she felt that she would be the one that would kind of put everything right. So you do have to have a think about who you feel comfortable with. Other people tell me that, say they've lost their mum, and they're discussing it with a friend, and the friend just wants to talk about her grief. And I suppose that's a common thing, but sometimes you just don't really want to hear about how badly they felt when their cat died. I mean, even though you might feel sympathetic, because you really just want to talk about how bad you're feeling about your mum. So there is a lot of selection that has to go on, I think, before you find the people that you can really trust with this information. And there's another sort of talking, which is not really about you and your grief. It's just introducing into conversation stuff about your mum, your dead husband, or your child. I was speaking to a gentleman not long ago whose adult daughter had killed herself, which I think is probably just about the most tragic loss that you would ever have to come to grips with. He said he liked talking about her because he felt that she had so much to offer and he had loved her so much. But he said he had to work out who he could do that with, because he said some people just kept trying to get him off the subject as if they were afraid he would break down and they wouldn't be able to cope with his sadness. And he felt that he wasn't going to break down. He just wanted to talk about her, but he has had to learn that you can't do it with everybody. But talking certainly is a very good thing. If you don't have somebody to talk to, what can you do? Well, there's this very good organisation you may know of. It's the National Bereavement Counselling Service in this country. It's called CRUSE, spelt C-R-U-S-E, and the title is CRUSE Bereavement Care. They have support groups, they have individual counsellors, they have loads of stuff on their website that can help. And anybody that feels isolated by their grief, I think would be a very good idea to get in touch with CRUSE. So let's now come to that phrase, get over it, because people will use this with you quite a lot. And I came to the conclusion in my own case that I didn't actually want to get over it. It seemed like a bit of an insult that I could get over the life I'd had with my husband or the death that he'd had. I didn't feel that was an appropriate use of terminology, really. And somebody actually, only about 8 months after my husband died, sent me a Christmas card saying, "It's your turn now, get over it and get out and have some fun." And I felt absolutely furious, actually, about that. Fortunately, this person lives at the other end of the country. I might have hit her. But so I think that you need to find your own terminology, and you may not want to ever use that term, get over it. I did, though, see a very useful thing on YouTube about grief, and this really struck home for me. This bereavement counsellor was saying, you don't get over it. This person who mattered so much to you is still there at the core of your being and will always be there. And there is a sort of emptiness, if you like, in the gut feeling about that person. But they still remain very much part of you. That won't change. What you do, though, is that you gradually construct your new existence, your travel plans, your new friends, a change of location, whatever you do, around that hurt. And that, to me, seemed like a very good way of thinking of it. So I pass it on to you in the hope that it will help you too.